Well, we were, of course, watching the TikTok hearings last week where there was tremendous bipartisan interest in banning the popular app from the U.S. But one congresswoman who does not agree with that approach is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who has sided with lawmakers who actually oppose banning the Chinese app TikTok. She explained why in this video on TikTok.
Why would we be proposing a ban regarding such a significant issue without being clued in on this at all? It just doesn't feel right to me. And additionally, this case needs to be made to the public. We are a government by the people and for the people. And if we want to make a decision as significant as banning TikTok, and we believe, or someone believes, that there's really important information that the public deserves to know about why such a decision would be justified, that information should be shared with the public as well. But frankly, I think a lot of this is putting the cart before the horse, because our first priority should be in protecting your ability to exist without social media companies harvesting and commodifying every single piece of data about you and without your consent.
AOC further justified her position by explaining that the U.S. has never gone so far as to implement a total ban of any social media company. She also added that many applications, not just TikTok, collect a wealth of information from its users without significant privacy and data protections.
So this was interesting. I should be clear. I mostly agree with what she says in that video. Look, banning TikTok would be a very radical, serious thing to do. It's a beloved and popular social media app where tons and millions of young people use it to interact with their friends, express themselves creatively, to educate themselves. It's how a lot of them consume news. It would be radical to do that, to ban one single app. This is, again, I don't even like government actions that are targeted against a specific company rather than industry specific across the across the line. And there was I think there were a lot of bad arguments made by lawmakers in these hearings. Now, I appreciate the potential national security concerns. I don't like the fact that this is a platform that, at least in theory, and I think sometimes in practice, the Chinese government can have significant input on the content. I understand the potential for them using it to gather information. I will say that, and actually AOC alludes to that in that video, that law enforcement have not put forth very tremendous evidence that this is, I believe it could be happening, but they didn't really prove that. There was no, as AOC said, there was no classified briefing to Congress about what, like, if national security wants to, behind closed doors, say, well, here's the problem with this, go ahead and do that. They didn't do that.
Yeah, and in fact,
so there's a lot of vibes here on why it's bad.
It was clear that legislators who supported a ban were really struggling themselves to come up with a theory of what the national security risks really were. There was one clip in particular that went sort of viral, in which a legislator seemed to have such a tenuous understanding of how Wi-Fi works and the security implications of being on a Wi-Fi network that he asked Chu a series of bizarre questions that Chu handled with a lot of grace, perhaps more grace than the lawmaker required.
We can actually watch
Let's cue that up.
Mr. Chu, does TikTok access the home Wi-Fi network?
Only if the user turns on the Wi-Fi. I'm sorry, I may not understand the
So if I have a TikTok app on my phone and my phone is on my home Wi-Fi network, does TikTok access that network?
It will have to access the network to get connections to the internet, if that's the question.
Is it possible then that it could access other devices on that home Wi-Fi network?
Congressman, we do not do anything that is beyond any industry norms. I believe the answer to your question is no. It could be technical. Let me get back to you.
Okay, I'd appreciate it if you could answer that.
Yeah, that was actually very reminiscent of the hearings from a year or two ago with Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey and others, where they were being asked questions from people on both sides of the aisle that were just so ignorant of the underlying technology.
Yeah, and there were some also that were like, well, in China, TikTok has more educational content. In China, children aren't allowed to use it. Why are you protecting Chinese children when American children aren't being protected? And he's like, these are your laws. You want to have access to this stuff. China has more restrictive laws about what people can see. If 100%. You want that, you guys can do that.
Yeah, they were saying, some people will make this argument that, well, in China, they don't allow kids access to this material. Well, that's because they don't allow kids access to criticism of the Chinese government. They don't allow them access to information about Tiananmen Square. They don't have a First Amendment, and they have a highly restricted
Is it authoritarian, or do you
Yeah.
think it's good to protect children from X, Y, and Z content?
Right.
And why are you trying to ask? You're concerned about the influence of the CCP, but now you want the CCP ostensibly to create educational programming for the U.S. kids. Like, which way do you want it?
That's the ultimate hypocrisy here in saying that. So I agree that China is a less free country because it doesn't have some of the protections for speech, political expression that we have. They have more tight regulation of media. Media is more state-run and state-controlled. We don't have that, so we have more of a Wild West approach. One I absolutely agree with as like a supporter of the Western Enlightenment, but that should constrain our government from doing brazen things like wholesale banning of speech, because this is ultimately speech. I think the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression had a really good statement on the TikTok matter, so I want to read it. They said, banning TikTok should be a last resort. A ban would shut down an immensely popular means of communications for tens of millions of Americans. Legislation that targets social media platforms, including TikTok, for their moderation practices or their distribution of propaganda or other allegedly harmful content raises serious First Amendment concerns. Government retaliation for or intrusion into a private social media platform's exercise of editorial discretion threatens platforms' own expressive rights under the First Amendment and potentially that of other speakers and publications too. They said, and Fire goes on to say, we recognize the significant national security threat posed by troves of sensitive information in the hands of an adversarial government, but any government regulation that seeks to address data privacy of TikTok should be generally applicable and use least restrictive means necessary to ensure privacy of American citizens while not unduly burdening First Amendment rights.
Yeah, that sounds largely right and echoes some of the sentiments that I saw from big free speech advocates like Glenn Greenwald. Yeah. He argued that the proposed TikTok ban isn't being driven by national security concerns. Instead, it's elites' strategy to deflect attention. Yesterday, he tweeted, quote, set aside the TikTok debate, American elites and their packaged discourse has increasingly relied on blaming the pathologies and suffering of Americans on foreign adversaries, Russia and China, as a means of distracting attention from the culpability of our own elite class.
And our government has been trying to do also, we've covered this time and time again, all of the pressure that American bureaucrats, government bureaucrats in the FBI, the CDC, the State Department, the White House, the Department of Homeland Security, about COVID, about jokes about the election. They're routinely flagging accounts for deletion, saying they're Russian bots, and they're not Russian bots. Our government is doing this to the American companies. So like, let's not distract from that. And Republicans really had their eye on the prize there at the previous hearing where Matt Taibbi and Michael Schellenberger were involved. And like, let's not lose sight of that. That's really important stuff. And they're getting a little bit distracted by like our kids love this app. Like that should be a factor here. How many people enjoy using it? You're gonna yank it all away from them.
Chu said in his initial TikTok predating this hearing that I think it was 150 million Americans use this app. That's half the country. That's an incredible amount of people who you're stripping this, this application from. That is going to have political consequences, and it was, I think, kind of smart of Chu to foreground that and say, "This is, it's not me taking this from you; it's your own government." And are there going to be political consequences from the people who hope to do this?
It's very infantilizing. It's very, I really oppose efforts to, treat kids as like pathetic and helpless and children until they're like age 25, or like prevent them from entering the workforce forever. We clash over some of those child labor laws, but this is a little bit doing that same thing. Like they're supposed to be making like college admission essays and figuring out the rest of their lives at 16, and you're saying they don't have the emotional maturity or their brain development or whatever to use TikTok? Doesn't make any sense to me. It
does feel a lot like, and a lot of these debates, people who are trying to control school curricula, people who are trying to control what's on TikTok, people who both are mad at the CCP for authoritarianism, but also mad that the CCP doesn't limit content for U.S. kids and make them smarter and give them the good educational content that apparently they're getting in China. It's a lot of folks who want other people to raise their kids. You know, they want to outsource all of this. But the thing is, you're never going to be able to, the school is never going to be able to impose all the values you want your kids to have, nor should they. TikTok is not supposed to be raising your children. Nothing is supposed to be doing it. And to the extent that there are valid concerns about what people are being exposed to, what they should learn and what they're internalizing, I think there's just no shortcuts around this stuff. It's going to come down to parenting. And if you don't want your kid to be on TikTok, you pay for the cell phone plan. So that's up to you to decide.
Amen to that. All right, more Rising right after this.